I've been working in patient engagement for several years now, but my experience in patient advocacy actually goes a long way back. I've lived with chronic illnesses since I was 3 years old. And from a young age, I was encouraged to get involved with nonprofits and to fundraise for a cure for my illness, which actually still doesn't exist. But I remember feeling like at that time, that model was very one sided. It was a one sided relationship, even back then. And there wasn't a lot of opportunity for me to become involved beyond fundraising, or actually to learn about the research that the fundraising was for. And so many years later, when I began my professional journey working in community organizing, I knew I wanted to find a way to incorporate patient advocacy and community organizing into my career. And I eventually ended up studying medical sociology and epistemology in graduate school. And I fell really in love with learning about the ways that lived knowledge, also known as experiential knowledge, is a crucial piece to science, a more accurate, holistic science, despite the fact that it's subjective in nature. How could I, as a qualitative researcher, study an illness that I have without some kind of bias? The reality is that we all come into research as research with our lived experiences and biases. And sometimes that actually means those biases give us certain insight that someone without those biases doesn't have. And so we have to rely on our scientific methods to ensure we produce objective science regardless of our biases. And we have to understand that those subjective lived experiences is knowledge that's imperative to the scientific process. So this particular conversation around science and lived knowledge is coined by epistemologists who study knowledge, and it has certainly influenced many folks working in the patient engagement space today. In the same coin, patient engagement is also influenced by community-based participatory research that recognizes community members as essential stakeholders in decision making around research priorities and determining community needs. So, that being said, all of these things are influencing our current state of patient engagement methodology, but I want to make it really clear that the rising trend of patient engagement in clinical trials is a huge direct result of the disability rights ethos that says decisions about us should not be made without us, and also the legacy of patient and caregiver advocacy. And as you can see on this first column here, in successful patient engagement work, patients and caregivers are likewise considered essential stakeholders in the clinical trial development. It recognizes that patients and caregivers hold knowledge that can't merely be taught out of the textbook. It has to be learned by building relationships, gathering experience data, and systematically valuing the unique knowledge that we as patients and caregivers have about our own conditions. So as a patient myself who's been doing this in community organizing for a while, you can usually tell when organizations are doing this work in a way that actually reflects this deep paradigm and cultural shift that truly embeds patients as stakeholders in our processes. And what sets organizations apart, like I mentioned earlier, is when there's institutional and systemic support for patients in decision making and transform this very traditional way of seeing patients as having a passive role in clinical trials and research. And again, historically, research has had a very top-down structure where industry plays the sole role decision maker. And we need to rebalance that through our patient engagement work and create a more equitable research ecosystem that makes research accessible to patient communities and ensures that the industry includes patients and caregivers in spaces where decisions are made and rooms as patients we weren't previously invited, welcomed, represented, or paid equally as subject matter experts. And so one of the questions I really like to ask people when talking about patient centricity is if patients and caregivers were in the room with us, whether those of us that we're talking about is in operations or logistics or product or marketing, sales, etc., would they like what they hear? And are we using patient-centric, people-first language that's embedded with support and encouragement rather than shame and fear and compliance? And so really, it's our job as the industry to learn how to shift our language and listen to patients and caregivers as subject matter experts And if we don't, we aren't creating an environment that's conducive to successful patient engagement work. Patient centricity and engagement is really an ethos for all of us who work in this field, that we work for patients first, even if patient and caregivers aren't in the room to represent ourselves.
So starting with a case study of redesigning an eCOA solution using Lean UX as a guiding principle. Now, what is Lean UX? It's just one of the many methodologies you can follow when incorporating UX into the software process. It's really useful when working on projects where the agile software development method is used. But fundamentally, Lean UX and other forms of UX all have the same goal in mind. And that is to deliver a great user experience. It's just the way that you work on a project is slightly different. And in order to make more sense of the Lean UX principle of make, check, think, I will give you an example of how we approach redesigning our eCOA solution. Starting with, why did we use Lean UX? A few reasons, but it boils down to tight deadlines and a need for quick results. As the name suggests, it's a stripped down approach to conducting UX research. So we started in the make cycle, in the make portion of the cycle, by making 2 prototypes of our eCOA app with different colors, different navigation, different icons, different fonts, essentially the same eCOA solution, just with different visual elements. And our focus was mainly on color, information architecture, and overall look and feel. We then moved on to the next part of the cycle, where we tested the same journey on 2 different versions. So we had version A and version B, conducted A/B testing, hence the name, which we combined with usability testing and compared the results and people's preferences. We tested with the general population for this, and the reason behind it is twofold. First of all, as I mentioned, we did not have the luxury of time to recruit patients with specific health conditions. And also, we wanted to appeal to a wider audience and believe that anyone could take part in a clinical trial at any point in their lives, including healthy participants also take part in trials. We then, after conducting the research, we analyzed the results from that, made some more prototypes, and just continued this cycle of make, check, think. Now, what insights did we gain from this research? Well, to start off, even though white and blue are often associated with medical care, it actually reminded participants of a hospital too much. And let's be honest, no one really likes being reminded of a hospital. And in that vein, I've also included some quotes from the people we interviewed. One of the prototypes we had was viewed as a little clinical, but with a fun edge. So color choice is really important, not only in terms of first impressions, but also how you make people feel during what might already be a difficult time for them. But really, the main insight we got is just to keep the navigation simple and straightforward, stick to clear and simple wording, and create engaging interactions and feedback. It's also important to keep the font choice and size easily readable. A fair amount of the older population we interviewed normally increase the font size on their phones. However, we found that by keeping the color contrast high and choosing an appropriate font and size of text, they all found it very easy to read and even explicitly commented on that being the case. Now, all of this gave us a very solid foundation on top of which to start redesigning our eCOA solution by basing it off of users' insights and feedback and combining that with best practices and already established design patterns. As I mentioned, I've also included some verbatim comments from the users we tested with, including a 52-year-old participant who said that even his parents would be able to use our solution, which I think is just fantastic. And another participant who said that it's easy to use even for a first-time user. Now, you would not expect someone who is taking part in a clinical trial to have used an eCOA solution before, so that was also really great to hear. And it's exactly the type of feedback and insight that you want to hear from patients.